At least 13 kids were killed and 4 others were injured in airstrikes recently, according to UNICEF. The location, not Lebanon, not occupied Palestine, but Sudan. Yes, the genocide that gets little to no coverage in today's media. Because of that, here is a short refresher. In 2019, Sudan was supposed to welcome a new era of democracy after overthrowing then dictator-in-chief Omar al-Bashir. 2 years later, however, it all fell apart when Sudan's military, together with the paramilitary Rapid Support Forces, the RSF for short, arrested the country's prime minister and threw civilians out of their power-sharing agreement. That top chair, however, was not big enough for both groups, as the army and the RSF started a war that continues to kill thousands while displacing millions. We've talked about humanitarian crises on this show several times before, but to give you an idea of how bad the situation is in Sudan right now, Reuters reported just recently that residents displaced by fighting or under siege in their homes have resorted to eating dirt and leaves. Yes, dirt and leaves. And look, as I said before, it didn't get this bad only recently. It's been this bad for months. We just haven't been paying attention. In February, the Associated Press reported that 13 children die of malnutrition each day at a camp for the displaced in northern Darfur. More than 75% of health facilities are out of operation. More than 20,000 cases of cholera recorded this year alone. People have no idea across the world that this is happening in Sudan. In fact, according to a new poll by Data for Progress here in the United States, when Americans were asked how much they knew about what was happening in Sudan, 36% said they knew a little, 59% said nothing at all. Well, joining me on this show today is someone that knows a lot more about what is happening in Sudan. Khalid Al Baih is a Sudanese artist, producer, writer, and Soros Fellow, and he joins me now from Italy. Khalid, thanks so much for coming on the show. People don't know very much about what is happening in Sudan. As I mentioned, the polling shows that Americans are pretty ignorant about it. We know the army a few weeks ago launched a major offensive to regain territory in the capital in Khartoum that they lost to the RSF. But just big picture, how bad are things right now in Sudan as a whole, given so much focus is on Gaza, Lebanon, Ukraine?
It's big picture and small picture is very bad in Sudan right now. In terms of the it's basically a displacement, a huge displacement situation, crisis. We have a health crisis. We have epidemics, like a lot of cholera right now is turning up. There's not enough hospitals for everyone. It's a really bad situation in all areas of Sudan, and even in the safe areas of where the army is located.
And of course, the ignorance about Sudan abroad is partly manufactured by the military and the militias, because they, as in Gaza, have blocked journalists from going into places. They have targeted journalists, they've killed journalists, detained journalists, done internet blackouts. It's very hard for people to find out what's happening on the ground in Sudan. How do people like yourself, people in the diaspora, how do they keep touch with family, friends back home? How do you get updates as to what's going on? How hard is it?
It's extremely hard. It's extremely hard. One of my friends who recently moved from the RSF areas to the safe army areas, he said it's more dangerous to have a camera than to have a weapon.
Wow.
In the RSF areas. So that's one of the main reasons why there's not enough footage coming out of Sudan. And sadly, because news at the end of the day became entertainment, and you need to be killed in 4G or whatever it's called, to 4K for you to be broadcasted, and that's one of the issues. So there's lack of footage coming out because it's very dangerous to have cameras. And there's not a lot of people that feel safe to be in Sudan. There's very brave journalists right now. You can count them in one hand, basically, journalists from Al Jazeera, journalists from Al Arabiya that are located in Khartoum right now. But it's incredibly hard to find any source of credible news. And that makes even the situation worse, because the war became kind of a media war between the videos that the RSF soldiers shoot about themselves and the videos that the army soldiers shoot about themselves. So this is all you got, and it's basically WhatsApp family groups.
Yes, and of course the distrust between the RSF and the army is so high that the price is being paid by innocent civilians caught in the middle. A recent UN fact-finding mission found that 63 out of 65 people tried by army-convened courts for working for the RSF were actually aid workers and activists.
Absolutely, absolutely. I mean, you really don't know what is the truth And it's exactly the same situation that is happening everywhere else. It's very kind of even football hooligans kind of looking at the war. If you're with the army, you're 100% with the army, no matter how many people they kill, no matter how many mistakes they make, they still cheer for the army. If you were the RSF, it doesn't matter if they are, genocidal. It doesn't matter if they're killing innocent people. It doesn't matter if they're shooting at schools and hospitals. They're still with the RSF. It's incredible. And that, again, comes back to the lack of real trusted news coming out of Sudan.
Khalid, you, of course, are an artist, and you use your art to tell the story of Sudan in ways that words simply cannot. The war in Sudan is one with several players involved from outside of the country. You displayed so much of that aspect of the story in a drawing that you posted in August that we're putting up on screen. Could you explain to our audience the meaning behind this piece and give us some of the background on the actors playing puppeteers in all of this?
I mean, it's really the same players in the whole region, right? You have two teams. You have the of course, from the Arab Spring until today, these two teams have learned to how to play the game, sadly. And in Sudan, because the revolution happened in Sudan in 2013, and later on again, and then again, finally in 2019 with the revolution. So when the revolution happened, I think the counter-revolution forces, whether it's the Saudis, the Emiratis, the Egyptians on one side, really kind of were ready to see what the next move is, right? So they did the same moves that they did in Yemen, they did in Libya, they did in Egypt.
Yeah.
It's the same scenario, right? So they put on a military, two leaders of the military and military council. They put the civilians that they would like to see on the table. The ones they don't like to see are pushed out, and they create, of course, of the lack of media. We saw the war on Twitter, the fake accounts, the troll farms. It's exactly the same thing that keeps happening every time, right? And they played a big role in the way that the war turned up today, and how it happened and where it happened. It's literally, they're reading from the same book.
I mean, one country in particular that even American politicians are now singling out in Congress is the UAE, which is an ally of the US, United Arab Emirates, which has been supporting militias on the ground. What do you make of the role of a country like the UAE when it comes to the fighting on the ground in Sudan?
I mean, of course, they're denying it, but everybody knows it. There were weapons found, and even before the war has started, they have took on Hemeti as their kind of child prodigy, their next Haftar, And what they wanted to do, I think, with Hemeti was avoid the mistake that they've done in Yemen. They didn't want to create another Houthi, so they got the Houthi on their side, and our Houthi was basically Hemeti. Right, so they have him on his side. They grew him. They grew his forces. He was fighting the war in Yemen for them. They had so many plans for them because at the end of the day, he was young. He was ambitious, and this is really what the Arab Spring or the young people want everywhere, right, in the region, a young person. And so they wanted him. PR. There was a Canadian company run by an ex-Mossad that was doing a whole lot of whitewashing for Hemeti, even though he is the same person that committed the 2003 and 2006 genocides in Darfur. All of that disappeared, and then he was a new person. And then yes. The Emiratis basically kind of made him play this new role of the savior after the revolution. And when the war started, when the war started, they basically were behind them. They had and in the surrounding countries as well. So they had an airport in Chad that delivers weapons, and of course they have Libya on the other side. So they were basically surrounding it from all sides, and this kind of now broke Sudan into different players. So you have the Libyans, the Chadians, on one side, and of course you have Abiy Ahmed in Ethiopia on one side, and then you have the Egyptians who want more the army than the RSF, because the Sudanese army and the Egyptian army always worked together. So it was always an extension of each other, and they see Hemeti as more of chaos than what the army is supposed to represent, which is more of just securing the area, making sure
Yes.
that
And
you know.
you mentioned the army. During his speech at the UN General Assembly in New York recently, Sudan's military leader Abdel Fattah al-Burhan, he claimed that the military is still committed to a transfer of power, to an elected government, a coalition government if need be, with the prerequisite being the complete disarmament of this militia, the RSF, the withdrawal of their forces. Do the people of Sudan, if I can even make such a sweeping claim about such a big group of people, do they trust the current government, the military, to bring an end to this war? And do you think any of that can even happen? Do they think it can happen without external intervention?
Most of the people of Sudan, most of the people that had to escape Sudan, are now very happy with the advancements that the army is making. Not because we love the army, but because of how we know how dangerous the RSF is, and how they're backed by the UAE. And we see the situation that any country that was backed by the UAE, whether it's Egypt or Libya, we see what happens. The country divides, and then you lived under the good dictator for we don't know how long. So most of the army is willing and kind of cheering for most of the countries, kind of cheering for the army right now, because they know that if the army wins, we're going right back to the street to fight that army. It's not for the love of the army, right? And this is it's a small thing that happened.
The age-old lesser of two evils.
People from the old regime came back to Port Sudan, where the army, where it's basically the new capital now. And the RSF tried to make that as, see, the old regime is coming back. They're part of the army. And the internet, the Sudanese internet, came back and said, we are still for the revolution. We don't care if they come back. We will still fight them. We are here for December, and we will still be here for December.
Last question, just sticking to the issue of intervention. That same Data for Progress poll I cited a moment ago asked Americans what they think their country's role should be in Sudan. 51% said the US should help end the war through diplomatic efforts. 13% said they should do the same using military efforts. What role, if any, can the US play in bringing the war to an end in Sudan?
I think just putting pressure, real pressure, would really end this war. At the end of the day, the UAE should be pressured into stopping supplying weapons to the RSF, right? And the army, I think, will sit down if they feel that the RSF doesn't have enough power to fight them for longer. If there is real pressure put on both the army and the RSF and their suppliers, this war will stop.
We can only hope. Khalid Al Baih, thank you so much for coming on the show and enlightening us. Appreciate your time.
Thank you very much for having me.
Did you like this video? Don't forget to subscribe to this YouTube channel and turn on notifications. For exclusive content and to support our independent, unfiltered journalism, head over to Zeteo.com. Your support matters.